To be quite honest, if I wasn't already an atheist, I think I'd be driven to that point by these books because clearly there is no God. Hey besties, it's Sarah. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be continuing a series that's been forming on my channel where I go out of my way to read the most depraved subgenres of romance. And now I'm going to be reading taboo romances. A taboo romance is something that society would normally balk at. It is not a normal relationship. It's not one that people would typically condone. So because I apparently hate myself, I sought out the most taboo of taboo romances. I wanted to be clutching my pearls, and that I did. I have no pearls left to speak of. I clutched them right off. I cannot emphasize this enough. I deeply regret the books that I chose to read for this vlog. My brain chemistry will never be the same. I'm really building this up because I want you to know what you're getting yourself into. I am going to give a trigger warning now. These books have a lot of violence against women, a touch of power imbalance, sexual assault. Also, I will be using humor to cope with what I had to experience in these books, but I do want to emphasize that I am actually very seriously disturbed by what I read. So with all of that out of the way, I'm sure you're wondering, what books did you read, Sarah? How could they be that bad? The first book that I picked up was Credence by Penelope Douglas. We've got our girl Tiernan. Her parents die. Her estranged step-uncle, whom she has never really met, reaches out to her and invites her to come live with him and his sons in the middle of nowhere. And she proceeds to have a relationship with all three of them. And it's very Sweet Home Alabama. And then the next book we'll be talking about is Dark Notes by Pam Godwin. This is a student-teacher relationship with some BDSM thrown in. Our main character lives in poverty, but she goes to a very high-end music school, and her music teacher starts a relationship with her. And then lastly, the book that inspired me wanting to read taboo romance is one so depraved that it is banned from Amazon. I had to go on this random ass website called Eden's Bookstore and download the EPUB for $5, and then I could get it on my Kindle to read, and there is no audiobook for it, which is good. This one is about a family who is suffering from the loss of one of their children, and they move to the middle of nowhere in Alaska. And partway through living there, the mother dies, and what's left behind is the father and the daughter, and in their loneliness, they turn to one another. You did just hear me right. It is actual incest. There's no step in this one. It's just father, daughter, but way too close. I just wanted to give you guys these quick synopses so that you know what we're about to encounter in these books, because it's depraved, it's dark-sided, and it's not for the faint of heart. An alternative title for Credence could be Three Grown-Ass Men Manipulate a Barely Legal Girl. So this book focuses on our main character, Tiernan, and her parents recently have died. And so she gets a call from her estranged step-uncle who's like, hey girl, your parents in their will said that I am now your guardian until you turn 18, which by the way, she is conveniently turning 18 in like 3 or 4 months. So Tiernan agrees to go to Colorado because she's like, I don't have a lot going on in LA, so I might as well go. She lives in Los Angeles because her parents were very influential people in Hollywood. Her mom was a famous actress, and I believe her dad was a really popular director. And so it's kind of a big to-do that they died. And what you need to understand about Tiernan going into this story is that Tiernan is desperate for a family and for love, because even when her parents were alive, they never really loved her. They only loved each other, but she just feels like this is an opportunity to experience something new. She really likes being in the outdoors. She likes animals. And so she's like, let me go live on this farm. And a big thing about this farm is that because it's in Colorado, when wintertime comes, they get snowed in for 6 months. So the uncle makes it very clear to her on the phone that like, if you come stay with us through the winter, you literally can't leave. So from the moment that her uncle picks her up from the airport, she's like, he's kind of sexy, he's kind of hot, he looks good for 40. Also, by the way, I will be spoiling literally all the books that I'm reading in this vlog because I just have to talk about the depraved things that I personally had to experience, and I'm putting it on you as well. And then she meets her cousins one by one. She meets Noah first. He's pretty nice. Honestly, Noah is probably the least offensive thing about the story. And then we meet Caleb. Caleb is not home when she first gets there, and so she stays in the house for a couple of days, not really knowing much about Caleb. And the way that Caleb arrives on the scene is just purely sexual assault. So basically what happens is Tiernan is in the garage at night, like getting something, and then Caleb just like opens the door, he like slams. Like I kind of pictured it like in those horror films when someone opens the door really suddenly and like lightning flashes behind them and they're backlit and you like can't see their face. Like that's the vibe it was giving. But anyway, he shows up with this dead deer carcass on his shoulders. He's shirtless, he's been out in the woods, he's been hunting, and that's where he's been. And so he sees Tiernan and he immediately decides to try to have sex with her. So he very forcefully like shoves her against the wall and then throws her on top of the car, and there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of movement, and Tiernan is clearly telling him, no thank you, like I've never met you before, you're also my cousin. And it's not until Noah comes to save her that Caleb finally stops. But it's very heavily a sexual assault scene. I'll try not to go into too much depth with these scenes because I myself was not having a good time when I was reading them. Also, before I even continue summarizing this book, I need to say there is no reason on God's green earth that Penelope Douglas needed to make this main character 17. It's giving very virginal Pornhub vibes all throughout this book because it's a big deal that Tiernan has like never been touched by a man. She's a virgin and she chooses to have this reverse harem with her stepfamily. A lot of fairly boring things happen for the first quarter to half of this book. Honestly, the sex scenes don't really start taking place until like midway through. And let me tell you, when the sex scenes start, they don't end. Like, it is one of the horniest books I've ever read in my entire life. So as we're getting to know Tiernan as our main character in the beginning of this book, all you need to know about her is that watching paint dry on a wall would be more interesting than reading about her. I swear to God, there's actually a quote in the book where Tiernan is talking about herself and she says that she has the personality of a brick. Very confused about why Miss Penelope would want to have a main character who describes herself as a brick, but it is something that she does in this book. So let's just flash forward. Tiernan turns 18 and her uncle is like, my niece is looking quite sexy. Should I hook up with her? So he like denies himself a bit. We get a POV from him and he's like, oh, I'm too old for her. She's just so hot and young and sexy. And then eventually her and her uncle give in to their desires. And what's very creepy about this is that it is quite clear that they're so they're not blood related, but Tiernan constantly calls him her uncle even when they're having sex. Like she's like, my uncle did this, and I'm like, please, I cannot. Like I was saying, there's not really a good reason why Tiernan should be so barely legal and virginal in this book. I don't really know what we were supposed to be getting out of that because this is an adult romance. And so there's something about reading a 17 turning 18-year-old girl that just doesn't sit right with me in my soul. And in the first sex scene, when her and Uncle Jake finally decide to do the deed, Tiernan is literally wearing pigtails in her hair because they're like out hunting. It was giving Pornhub, honestly, like Pornhub homepage, like Uncle Rails, hot niece, pigtails, comes inside. Because also Penelope makes a huge deal of being like, I don't want to wear a condom because I want to feel everything. Also, this book is insanely misogynistic. At the very start when we're meeting Jake, Caleb, and Noah, all of them tend to have like lots of women coming in and out of their bedrooms at night, so Tiernan has to hear them having sex a lot and they just kind of like whore around town. And when Tiernan gets any sort of attention from any of the local boys, the guys go crazy. And at one point the uncle threatens to spank her, and he also tells her that she belongs to him and Caleb and Noah. As I mentioned earlier, this book is basically sexual assault city because every scene with the brother Caleb is non-consensual. There's only like 2 consensual scenes with him in total, and he is quite literally a psycho. He is the most jealous of anything that Tiernan does. One fun fact about his character is that he's mute because something very traumatic happened to him when he was a toddler that we don't find out about until much later in the novel. And so he does not speak, he just acts very animalistic. And so in that first scene when he's meeting Tiernan and he assaults her, it's clear that he just like acts on like feeling and emotion, and he just does whatever the fuck he wants. And so after Tiernan starts sleeping with Uncle Jake, Caleb does not like this, and so he actually physically assaults Tiernan by like throwing her against the wall, and then he takes a permanent marker and he writes slut on her forehead, and then he spits in her hair. And he also at one point throws food at her, and he also flips a table, and he's just generally very unhappy that she is having sex with his dad. And we don't really know why at this point. Obviously if you have any sort of like brain cells, you'll know it's because he likes her, but We don't get good vibes from Caleb, and honestly, neither does Tiernan. Tiernan doesn't really like Caleb in the beginning of the novel. And then we have Noah. Like I said, he's the least offensive brother or family member. He really likes Tiernan as well, but he's a lot more like innocent about it. Like he tells her that he wants to have sex with her and stuff, but he's more like kind about it, I guess. Like he doesn't like force her, and he's also not her 40-something-year-old uncle taking advantage of her. I think he's a lot closer to her in age. Like he's 20 and she's 18, so it's a little bit better, but he's not even that much better, because the worst scene in this entire book is when Uncle Jake goes on a trip away, like in the winter, and so she is now locked in with just Caleb and Noah, and they have a threesome. This is real incest that's happening, because Caleb and Noah are blood related. Like Tiernan might not be related to them really, but they are literally brothers. I really had no words when I was reading that scene. It was not a sexy threesome to me. I was afraid, to be quite honest. I cannot imagine wanting to hook up with somebody with my sibling. Like I have a sister, and I cannot imagine me and my sister hooking up with someone together. That is like throw up worthy. And so you would think with this being a reverse harem, there would be a lot of like, let's just share her all together. Uncle Jake gets a piece, Caleb, Noah, like we all do it together, and we all love Tiernan. But there was a lot of like jealousy in this book. Like Uncle Jake is mad that she slept with them, and like I said, Caleb is literally like assaulting her physically at any turn when she does things with other guys. And even though he does the consensual threesome with her, he's still like angry after, and he basically thinks of her as a whore. Like we literally get a perspective of his where he's thinking about how she just like opens her legs for anyone, and he's quite disrespectful to her actually, and a bit angry and scary. There were points where I was like, am I reading a horror novel? Is this a thriller? Here's the thing, and I say this with a very, very large grain of salt, like the biggest grain of salt you've ever seen, like not even a grain of salt, like a boulder of salt. Like I don't even know if I mean this, but I feel like I could get into taboo romance if you sold the fantasy, if you made all the men loving and caring, and everybody's like respecting Tiernan's sexuality. Nobody tries to own her. Like this is a reverse harem where we just like are free. The only thing taboo about this is that society wouldn't approve of this like step situation. I feel like I could have gone on board with that, but literally every scene with Caleb besides the threesome is non-consensual. Like it is sexual assault city, and Penelope Douglas is the mayor. I really am going to report her to the cops, to be quite honest. Like I do not understand why she wants to write the way that she writes. So for some reason, Tiernan decides that she has to pick out of all the three guys, and lo and behold, she decides she's in love with Caleb, even though number one, he's mute, so he doesn't talk, and so she's never really conversed with him or known his inner thoughts. Not to say that mute people cannot have like thriving relationships, but Caleb in particular doesn't communicate really at all. He barely nods his head yes or does anything, and he doesn't write at all or sign. So there's really not a way to communicate with him. And then on top of that, he's a psycho. Like he's literally psychotic. But weirdly, Tiernan decides that that's who she wants to have a relationship with. And so she immediately ceases having sex with Uncle Jake and Noah, and she's all about Caleb. And so then later in the book, there's this big thing. I don't even want to get into what happens, like that third act miscommunication trope, but basically this miscommunication thing happens, and she tells Caleb, she's like, if you don't speak out loud to me, I'm leaving and going back to Los Angeles. Which I don't know a lot about mutism, but I feel like that's not how it works, especially if it's a result of a very traumatic experience, which we do figure out what happened to Caleb. I felt bad for him for sure, because what happened to him in childhood was sad, but I do not believe it gave him a license to do the things to Tiernan that he did. But for some reason, Tiernan is just like obsessed with Caleb. She's like, oh my god, he like abuses me, but I kind of like it, like I'm into it, and like I want to know more about him. And so after this miscommunication thing happens, she demands, she's like, you better talk or I'm leaving. And then she leaves, and a few months later, Caleb shows up, and then he talks to her, and they get back together, and then in the epilogue, they have a child, like 5 years later. Also, oh my god, there's a scene when her and Caleb do get together where he throws away her birth control because he wants her to get pregnant. If I met a man like Caleb, I would immediately call the authorities. I also am currently in talks with the FBI to try and put Penelope Douglas on a watch list. Like it's a real thing that I'm trying to do, because what the fuck? Also, I had to see what this author looked like, because I was like, who is writing this? And I looked up her picture. Tell me why she looks like Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos, like the biggest grifter of our age. Like they could be the same person. Like tell me that's not the same person. I have finished Dark Notes by Pam Godwin, and I have one question for our girl Pamela. What the absolute fuck? So this book opens on our main character, Ivory, and she is living in extreme poverty. She lives with her mom and her brother's friend, and her brother's friend likes to get a little bit touchy with her. He basically essays her often. There's something about these books where they love sexual assault, and I don't know why, because it doesn't feel like it has to happen in order for the books to be taboo. I feel like they're just throwing in dark shit for fun. Anyway, so we open on that and we find out that Ivory goes to a very fancy private school for music. Before her father died, he prepaid her way through this school, and so now that is her only saving grace in this life. She lives in the projects, but she's been saving and scraping by every day with the hopes of getting into a conservatory when she graduates, because she specifically plays piano and she would love to be in a symphony someday. And so she is really looking forward to trying to get into this very prestigious school in New York City. The alternative title for this book would be How to Catch a Predator 101. This student-teacher romance is very much giving that time in middle school when your guidance counselor comes to visit your class to talk to you about grooming and pedophilia and letting you know what signs to look out for. Like if an adult says this to you, maybe you should not say yes, or you should tell on them, and sort of just like letting you know the ways in which adults might try to manipulate you and touch you in your no-no zones. That is this book in a nutshell. I said this before when I was talking about credence, and I'll say it again. I don't understand why these authors want to write the books like this. Like, why are you making the men so disgusting? I feel like we already live in a society where men believe that they own our bodies and they walk around thinking they can do whatever they want to women and being just awful people. Why would you then write a love interest who feels like that? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you more about this book and why I'm getting so upset about this topic. I want to ask Pam and Penelope, the PPs, why do you want to write abusers as the love interest? What is going on? So when Ivory shows up for the first day of school with this new teacher, she immediately notices that he's attractive and he's young. But she doesn't really have any intention of anything weird with him. She just knows that he's going to be her piano teacher and that she needs him to give her the recommendation. But the minute that Emmerich, the teacher, that's his first name, sees Ivory, he thinks that she is a teacher because she's very voluptuous and tall, and she's not like the other girls her age. And so he thinks she's an adult woman when he meets her, and she's like, no, I'm actually a student. And he's like, oh fuck, because this is dual POV, so we get to hear all of his nasty little thoughts when he's thinking about an underage girl. And so from the moment he sees her, he thinks she's the sexiest thing on legs. Like, he cannot believe his eyes that he's like seeing this curvaceous young girl. When the class starts, it's pretty obvious that Ivory is missing some school supplies. She doesn't have a textbook and she doesn't have a tablet, and so he gets like irrationally mad about this. It's sort of implied that the reason he's getting so angry at her is because he is attracted to her and she's making him really horny in the middle of class, even though he's only known her and seen her for like 5 minutes. So he ends up making her stay after class so he can talk to her about it. And this is when he demands that she tells him her life story and try to figure out stuff about her. And so essentially she ends up telling him about how poor she is. Like, she lives in like utter poverty. Like, she can barely afford to eat. Like, we open with her talking about how she can't afford food for her cat, she can't afford food for herself, and her mom and her brother are drug addicts, and so she's living in a really fucked up situation. And so we are in Emmerich's perspective as she's telling him this, and he is so disgusting. Like, he literally is smirking at her the whole time she's talking about her poverty because he finds her hot. And as she's talking about how her dad died and they lost all their money and this and that, he's literally thinking about all the ways he could teach her how to give him a blowjob, like literally talking and thinking about his cock. It's really, really disturbing how much he doesn't really think of her as a person. He's thinking of her as an object. He is thinking about her in a way that I do not want a single man to ever think about me. Like, when I am walking around the streets, I hope to God a man never thinks of me like this, because it's quite aggressive and violent. Because another little thing with this book is that Emmerich is really into BDSM, and so he's thinking about spanking her and forcing his cock down her throat and all these different things, and she's just like, I just want to pass this class and go to a conservatory. Like, if Pamela really wanted me to be into this, she should have made Emmerich a really kind soul that actually felt guilty about finding his student attractive. Like, he's just a little man whore right away. Like, I don't believe in celebrity sluts, but he's a slut. What is so disturbing about this book is that it literally feels like a tutorial on how to groom a teenager, because we'll be in Ivory's point of view and we'll hear her sort of like naive thoughts. She'll be like, I've never had a man kiss me like this. I never knew that kissing could feel good. I've only ever felt violence at the hands of men, and all I want is Emmerich to notice me and give me attention and love. And like he'll just give her these like little morsels of affection. Like at one point she's crying to him about the fact that her dad died, and he like holds her while she's crying, and then he very quickly gets mean after that. And then when we're in his perspective, it's so icky because he keeps thinking about how he likes how innocent she is, and he likes that he's going to be the first man to like ever give her an orgasm, and that she doesn't have a lot of like good experience with sex, and how he's going to like change that. And it's very clear early on that Ivory's not super into the BDSM aspect that he is looking forward to, because there is this one moment where they have not done anything physical yet. They've just been like flirting, and she like cried on his shoulder the one time, and she throws a marker at him because he makes her really mad. And so then he threatens her, and he basically says, you either can take your skirt down and let me spank your ass, or I'm going to tell the dean that you threw a marker at me and you might get suspended. So he like really takes his power and authority and uses it over her. And so I feel like for me, like if I was ever going to ever be okay with a student teacher book, which I probably wouldn't if we're being completely honest, it would have to be a scenario where the teacher doesn't want in any form to put their power over the girl. The book gets extra icky when he starts stalking her because he's so obsessed with her. He starts following her around, watching her when she's at her house, going to the music store that she works at. It's just giving stalker vibes, like Joe from You, anyone? And there's this one part where he makes her go to lunch with him on the weekend, and he makes out with her in a park, and right when she starts getting really into it, he pushes her away and he's like, we can't do this, it's illegal, I'll get arrested. And he puts all the onus on her as like, we have to control ourselves, like we did this together. There's a lot of back and forth that keeps happening, like they're kissing, they're doing this at school, they're talking, whatever. And then eventually Emmerich saves her when she is being assaulted by another student, and then he takes her to his house and he's like, you're mine now, we're together. And he basically forces her to move in with him even though they've really known each other for a couple of weeks. She obviously goes with him right away because she's poor as shit and she doesn't have food or clothes or anything at home, and he has a whole closet full of clothes that are perfectly her size because again, he's been stalking her, and he has decided that it's time for her to live with him even though she's a 17-year-old girl and he's 27. He also quizzes her and interrogates her about her sexual past because he knows that she's been sexually abused, and so she like forces him to tell her how many men she slept with and like what all the scenarios were, and he's kind of mean to her about it when he's asking her to reveal all of her trauma. So after she tells him there's all these men that have taken from her and basically assaulted her, he says to her, I want to whip you for being so uninformed about rape. What the hell? He vacillates between victim blaming her and then telling her it's not her fault. So in one breath, she'll be like, oh, you must think that I'm a slut now. And he's like, don't you dare say that. I don't think you're a slut. Those men took advantage. And then in the next breath, he's like, I can't believe you didn't know what rape is. Like, sorry, she's a teenager. Her frontal lobe, like we've been over this. Like, it's not developed. Like her brain is not developed yet. It feels like it's only upsetting to him because it's inconvenient to his sexual desires, because he wants her to be like this virginal, pure little girl that he can corrupt. And so he's very upset that other men have gotten to her first. Like he thinks to himself, like, I can't believe another penis has been inside her. And it's just like giving gross. Like it's disturbing, honestly. There's a good portion where Emmerich withholds sex from Ivory because he tells her that she's not ready for him. And so he keeps like teasing her sexually. And then at one point he chokes her to test her because, you know, he really wants to do the BDSM stuff. She starts crying because she wasn't expecting him to choke her, and he didn't tell her he was going to do that. And then later they come up with a safe word for her to use when they do have sex. He does something that she's not comfortable with, and so she uses the word, which he swore up and down he was like so down for. He's like, I need you to use your word, like I need you to feel safe with me, like I need you to trust me. And then he gets mad at her for using the word. It made me so sad to be reading this. Like I know like Ivory is not a real person, but she was just so heavily manipulated, and she was so convinced that they were so in love, and it made me so sad because it felt like My Dark Vanessa, but a romance book which is just horrifying. So if you haven't already guessed it, I am also telling the FBI about Miss Pamela. I am putting her on the watch list as well. These taboo books are really just hammering home that these authors will stop at nothing in pursuit of an orgasm. Also, oh my god, I forgot to say, you know how her whole dream was to go to this conservatory in New York City? She gets an audition and I believe she gets into the school, but then at the end of the book, Emmerich gives her a bar and he basically makes her open her own piano bar, and so she forfeits going to the school and she just stays in New Orleans with him, and so she basically is just with him. And then the epilogue is only 4 years later, like when she's like in her early 20s, and they're married. She literally threw away her whole life to be with this icky man. All I can say is that these books are why God stays in heaven. He's ashamed of us. Okay, besties, I finished The Wild by Kay Webster literally last week, but I have not been able to bring myself to talk about this book. This is probably one of the hardest vlogs I've ever filmed in my life, and that is saying a lot because I have filmed so many videos where I've read books that I don't like, and this one just really takes the cake. Why must all of these characters be underage? What is wrong with these grown-ass women writing romance novels that they have to make the main character 16 or 17 years old? Like, what is going on up here? Like, psychologically, have you spoken to someone? Because I'm curious. So we start off this book with a pretty unhappy family. We have the daughter, Devin, who is 16, her dad, Reed, and then her mother, Sabrina. And Sabrina has been depressed for a really long time because when Devin was a child, her twin brother actually died in an accident. And so Reed, our leading man, has decided enough is enough, and he wants his family to get back to normal, to be close, and so he has sold off his construction business. They are very conveniently rich, so they can afford to do this, and he has bought thousands of acres of land in Alaska, and so he is uprooting his family to Alaska, and they are driving in an RV. There's a storm, and Reed parks the RV on the edge of a cliff, which, foreshadowing, that's not a great idea. And so there's this thing that Reed likes to do with Sabrina where if he gets mad at her for being depressed, because he does it a lot, he blames her for her depression and not getting out of bed. It's a whole thing. Like, he's just like, oh, she doesn't want to be the best mom. She wants to just be like a lazy sack of bones. He'll go into the room where she's laying down in the dark saying that she has a headache because she's feeling down. And then he'll just start having sex with her lifeless body. You know, just marital things. We actually are subjected to 2 scenes where Devin hears her parents having sex within like 24 hours. And so at night, Devin is sleeping out in the living room and her parents are doing whatever in the bedroom, aka Reed is doing it to Sabrina. And early on, we find out that Devin's a little bit of a freak because she kind of likes hearing her parents have sex. And so in the nighttime scene, she starts touching herself a little bit while her parents are doing that, which, okay. And then, if it couldn't get any worse, the next part is that in the middle of the night, Devin has a nightmare because the storm is just raging outside. And so she decides to go get in her parents' bed. So she gets between her mom and dad. And then in the middle of the night, Reed doesn't know that she got into the bed. And so he reaches over thinking that the person next to him is Sabrina, his wife. And so he starts fingering her being Devin, his daughter. What's so crazy to me is that we are really setting this book up to be incestuous even before they're stranded in the woods. So Reed is just finger banging his daughter, and then he realizes who it is that he's touching, and so he freaks out and he's like, oh my god, and he like yells and he gets out of the bed and he like goes to the other room, and right when he's in the other room is when the lightning and like the thunder really strike, and then the cliff that they're parked on gives way and the RV just starts tumbling in the air, and it's this whole crash. The saddest part of this was that the dog gets injured, and I personally am someone that gets really sad when dogs are injured in books. I didn't really give a fuck about these people, but I really cared about the dog. But basically what happens is that the RV tumbles onto a tree off the side of this cliff, and so Devin gets somewhat impaled by a branch, and then her mother is completely just like dead in the trees. Very convenient that the mother died this early on in the book so that we can just really ship Reed and his daughter together. What is so weird about this book is Devin wants her dad so early on. Like, we're not even under duress. She just wants her dad right off the bat. First, she's masturbating to her parents having sex. Then she actually likes it when her dad accidentally finger bangs her. And now when they're camping out in a tent after everything that's happened, they've been in this crash and he accidentally did that to her, she tries to make a move on him in the tent. And the dad, rightfully so, is not into it at first. I will say, I wanted the dad to put up more of a fight. I feel like he only puts up a fight for like maybe 4 pages. It's not very long before he's giving in to Devon's feminine wiles. And there's multiple times where Reed tries to tell Devon that the way that she wants him is inappropriate because number one, he's her dad. That's the biggest issue. And then number two, he's in his 40s. So it's just kind of weird because she's underage. I really, really wish that the story had been about an adult daughter, like someone in their like 20s or 30s, because then it would still be gross, but at least it would be like, okay, a full-grown adult is deciding to do stuff with her dad. But I guess she wanted Devon to be younger so that Reed could be younger, so that he could be hotter, because we go on and on and on for many pages about how hot he is and how he has 6 packs and he's just a sexy daddy. I think the first time they really have something happen is when Devon is turning 17, like it's finally her birthday. And so they celebrate by drinking some whiskey that her dad has. And then she tells them that all she wants for her birthday is a kiss. And so they end up making out. But that scene is so insane because after they make out, Reed gets so mad that they did that he spanks her to the point where she throws up from the pain. It's the wildest scene. Like, he literally is like, I can't believe we're doing this, and like throws her over his knee and then just like beats the shit out of her until she literally vomits. Just like abuse on every front in this book. So fast forward, we are subjected to a lot of sex scenes, like a lot of sex scenes before we even get another plot point. And a lot of these scenes are Devon's father teaching her about sex because she doesn't really know much about it. So she's very naive. Like, she actually acts like a 16-year-old and she's very immature. And so her dad has to like explain things to her a lot, which again, it's just like not sexy to me. It's giving pedophilia. The next big plot beat that I think Kay Webster intended to be really exciting and interesting is that there are bears in Alaska, and there ends up being a bear that attacks Devon, but her dad comes and saves her. And so Reed ends up getting like torn up to shit by this bear. And so Devon drags him into the cabin and he has to get nursed back to health. Devon comes up with this novel idea. It just occurs to her. She's never heard of this before, but it just comes to her mind. And she's like, Dad, what if I put my nether regions on your face and then my face was down in your nether regions and we were just both going to town? Because she's never heard of 6090 before. I actually, at this point, I started highlighting things in the book, so I actually have quotes to share with you. I've fucked her twice and I'm dying for more. I don't tell her they have a name for her suggestion, 69, because I love keeping her as innocent as I can. Heavy on the pedophilia. At the 43% mark in the book, I specifically wrote this down. She is already pregnant. And what's so wild is he gets so mad at her when he finds out that she's pregnant. He gives her the cold shoulder, but then he also spanks her even though she's literally pregnant. Like, why would you beat up a pregnant lady? Eventually, Reed is happy that Devon is pregnant and they decide that they're really excited to start a family together, which is interesting, especially because you're like, okay, you guys are family and you've decided to be together even though it's wrong. So what if you have a child? Are you guys gonna hook up with the child as well? Like, is the incest just gonna be going on forever and ever? Is this gonna be generational trauma? Apparently, Kay Webster decided that the plot was getting stale after all the sex scenes she was subjecting us to, and so she decides that out of nowhere, these random hillbillies were gonna show up, like these people who live in the woods, very hills have eyes vibes, just show up, these inbred crazy people, and they end up sexually assaulting Devon, and she ends up losing the baby. But obviously miscarriage is a very sad topic, and Kay Webster was just like, what if I threw that in? Like, I feel like that would really like add a lot to the plot. Okay, not to make it worse than what I'm already describing, but I want to read part of a sex scene to you guys so you can know how bad this is. This video is absolutely getting demonetized. Seeing her so free and lost to the pleasure has my nuts drawing up, eager to release. To my horror, I begin spilling abruptly inside of her before she orgasms, but thankfully it seems to set her off because her pussy clenches hard around me with her release. Our bodies make slurping sounds as she continues to fuck me. When the last of my seed pours inside of her, I take a moment to stare at her while her eyes are still closed. Serene, happy, mine. If I had to read that, you guys do too. I don't know if there's a universe where I could even ever be on board with a father-daughter relationship, but the least you could do is be a good author. Do you love me like you loved mom? I ask, my voice but a whisper. His thumb runs across my lips. I loved your mom a lot in the beginning, but over time, I fell out of love with her. We just didn't connect anymore. I wanted to love her. I forced myself to love her, but I wasn't in love with her. But you, I fucking love you more than words can describe. It isn't a feeling. It's like a storm that crashes into me and obliterates me. I can't stop it. I wasn't prepared for it. I just know that it's the best thing and scariest thing to ever happen to me. Oh my god, I also forgot to mention there's a bunch of flashback scenes where it shows us what Reed and Devon's relationship was like when they were in the normal world, like before they were stranded in Alaska. And at first it starts out pretty innocently, like very father-daughter moments, and then eventually it starts getting weirder and weirder. There's this scene where they were in the hot tub together talking about how they're going to be moving to Alaska soon, and Reed keeps thinking about how sexy Devon looks in her bikini, and she sits on his lap at one point because it's kind of like a father-daughter thing to do, I guess, and he starts getting an erection because she's so sexy in her little bikini, and so he has to leave. And then him and Devon decide that they want to go to see a movie, and so Devon puts on this little dress because she wants to look good for her dad because they're going on like a sort of like daddy-daughter date. And so they go out and Reed is like, wait, we're not going to the movies. You look too good in this dress. Let's go out for dinner. And so they basically go on a date at this like seaside restaurant where they eat a bunch of seafood and they drink wine, and he lets her have a bunch of alcohol even though she's underage, and then they start dancing together, and Devon keeps thinking about how much she likes what they're doing because it makes her feel like she's on a date with her dad. You're basically telling me that they were going to start a relationship regardless if they moved to the middle of nowhere. Like they were gonna get together even if they were stateside and it was illegal. Eventually, Devon does get pregnant again, and they're very excited to start their family. They love their little cabin. They're just having a good old time. And then Reed asks her to marry him and be his wife. So it's like his daughter wife, I guess. And then suddenly this guy Atticus shows up. He's the guy that sold the land to Reed. He basically comes looking for them because he knew like during the winter and when like the storm was happening that something may have gone on, because he'd gone to the nearest town and he hadn't heard of Reed and his family coming through. So he comes looking for them, and he finds out that Reed and Devon are in a relationship, and he's obviously very disturbed by this, and he tries to tell Devon that he'll take her back to civilization and report this to CPS to like help her out. And Devon gets like really mad at him, and for some reason Atticus agrees to not tell anyone. He's just kind of like, I let people do whatever they want to do, I'm just telling you that I think this is wrong. And then Atticus becomes friends with them and helps them build a bigger addition to their log cabin since they're having a baby, and he also gets them a bunch of supplies and like goes into town and gets them things. And it just becomes this thing where Atticus keeps bringing Devon books about why incest is bad and how incest can create deformities like in your babies and stuff. And Devon acts really shocked by all this information because obviously she is a teenage girl and she hasn't really heard of a lot of this, and so she gets mad at her dad and she's like, I can't believe you didn't tell me this, blah blah blah. And then it comes upon that the biggest twist of this book is that Devon and Reed are not actually blood related, and Devon is adopted, which is really weird because I swear there was a part where Reed talks about having known Devon since she was a little baby, but then when we go back to the flashback scenes about when she was actually adopted as a toddler. It's kind of a weird twist in this book because she really wanted us to get on board with incest, and then was like at the end, just kidding, they're not related. And Devon actually gets mad when she finds out that they're not related. Like it upsets her that they're not as close as she thought they were. Flash forward to the end, they have their baby, and then in the epilogue, Devon is pregnant again. There's not a lot of very interesting things that go on in this book. I guess the bear attack and the initial accident that they get in is probably like the most interesting stuff. And then when Atticus shows up in the third act, I feel like that is just meant to add tension. But Atticus was just a weird wrench thrown in because I feel like he was trying to tell them that what they were doing was wrong, but then he didn't do anything about it. And also what was really weird about it is that Atticus was literally saying all the things that I was thinking about how wrong this is and how it's pedophilia and also it's incest and blah blah blah. So it was just a really weird book overall. And if you like these books, you may be offended by my rants in this video, and to that, I'm actually not even gonna apologize. Like I typically am someone that's like, hey, you can like whatever you want, whatever you're reading doesn't like reflect like your actual views, and that actually might be true, but I generally do not understand what you could be getting out of these books because they're so rife with sexual assault as well as the incest and the taboo stuff. It'd be one thing again if all the relationships were like super respectful or whatever, but a lot of them were just like bad men. Like if a man was thinking about me the way that these men were thinking about these women, I would be upset. It also just begs the question, like, how old are the people who are reading these books? Because a lot of the main characters are underage, and so I don't really know what the intended audience was. Like, I guess it was intended for adults, but if you look at the reviews, I feel like it's a good mix of older people as well as girls in their like late teens, early 20s, especially with Penelope Douglas books. And it just feels kind of irresponsible to romanticize this sort of stuff. But my biggest bone to pick is not even with readers of these books, because honestly, read whatever you want, I guess. I know that goes against what I was just saying. I will be judging you, but you can read whatever you want. It's a free country. I feel like the real bone to pick is with the authors. I just truly need to understand what these authors get out of writing these books. Like, what pleasure do you derive writing these sex scenes with underage girls or barely legal girls? Like, what's going on? These books were so dark-sided. I am gonna say this with my full chest. I do not believe that these authors will be seeing the gates of heaven. They will not. There's actually a seventh circle of hell just for them. And I say all of that as a non-religious person. To be quite honest, if I wasn't already an atheist, I think I'd be driven to that point by these books, because clearly there is no God. If you were a brave enough soul to make it to the end of this video, you should absolutely use the trophy emoji in your comments down below. You deserve a trophy for making it through this, because this was some traumatizing content. And if you're not here right now and you're not seeing this, I actually get it. If you clicked off the video, I understand. Let me know down below what you think the next subgenre I should do for these romance reading vlogs. I'm open to reading subgenres that I actually might enjoy. Like, if you want me to read historical romance or something cute, I would be down for something cute. But yeah, I really hope that you guys enjoyed my suffering throughout this video and that I at least made you laugh when talking about these crazy books. I thank you guys so much for watching. Like, I cannot emphasize how much I'm grateful that you watched this video. You're all beautiful. Have a nice day.